and reflection, we'll be able to take those into account too. Welcome once again to all the CRI members, major superiors, representatives of local unit CRIs, etc., who have joined us recently. We will now move on to the first session of today, the first input moment, which will be presented by Dr. Kochurani Abraham. I'd like to request Sister Rita to introduce Dr. Kochurani.
Good morning, everyone. Today's session. Am I audible?
Yes.
Share.
I'm so pleased to introduce this morning our first speaker of the day, the eminent personality, Dr. Kochurani Abraham. Dr. Kochurani Abraham is not a stranger to many of us. Though I did not have any opportunity of meeting Dr. Kochurani personally, I did have the opportunities of listening to her at various webinars, and I do admire her courage, conviction, and confidence in communicating what she believes in. Dr. Kochurani Abraham is a feminist theologian, gender researcher, and trainer from Kerala, India. She has a master's in child development from Kerala University, licentiate in systematic theology from Pontifical University of Comillas, Madrid, and PhD in feminist theology from University of Madras. Her feminist theological sensibilities awakened during her undergraduate studies of theology as a first woman student in an all-male theology college, and ever since, that has been her primary passion and commitment in her many engagements as a social activist, academician, and spiritual seeker. She teaches feminist theology in some institutes of formation, conducts sexuality, spirituality integration workshops, and gender sensitization programs for youth and adults. As a senior fellow of Indian Council of Social Science Research, she has researched on the gender awareness of youth and has initiated gender and sexuality education in schools. Her research interests include gender, ecology, spirituality, and transformative education. She contributes regularly to journals and collected works in India and abroad, and is passionate about bridging the academia and the grassroots for a liberative praxis. Besides being an active member and former coordinator of Indian Women Theologians Forum, she is also actively engaged in the World Forum of Theology and Liberation. She was a former coordinator of Ecclesia of Women in Asia, an association of Asian-level feminist theologians, and has been the board member representing Asia for International Network of Societies in Catholic Theology. At present, she is a regional coordinator of the Indian Christian Women's Movement for Kerala and the Vice President of the Indian Theological Association. Dr. Kochurani will talk to us this morning on gender question in the church. This is a subject in which we should all be deeply interested because it's a topic that will clarify the church's teaching rooted in the equal dignity of men and women as consecrated by God and help us to clarify our identity, role, and mission in the church. Finding our identity in anything other than God's design distorts our view of who we are and meant to be. Thank you, Dr. Kochurani, for accepting our invitation to address this august assembly this morning. So let's all welcome Dr. Kocharani Abraham to this virtual platform. Now over to you, Dr. Kocharani.
Hello and good morning to everyone. And thank you very much, Sister Rita, for the very kind introduction. I feel honored to be part of this great assembly, the Western Region CRI. I've been in Bombay very many years, so I'm very familiar with many faces here. And thank you very much to Sister Maggie for inviting me to share this time with you. When Sister Maggie invited me to speak at this AGBM, the topic she suggested was the challenges faced by the religious, especially women religious, and the response of the church leadership. I hear in this formulation some concerns which are not stated explicitly, but some allusion to issues that you would like to address. If we were to have a physical seminar instead of this webinar, I would have spent some time at the beginning asking you to spell out those challenges. You know them from your experience, and you would also know the response of the church leadership. After me, Sister Licia, SMI is asked to speak on empowering women within the church. And reading between the lines of what is proposed in this program, I perceive that there is an underlying desire to strengthen the collaboration between religious and church leadership in the mission of the church. As we know, majority of the religious are women religious, and almost all in the church leadership are men. So that is where I sensed we could address the gender question, which is like an undercurrent at the base of who we are and how we function as religious and as church leaders. It is a positive step that you, the leaders of Western Region CRI, are taking. And I appreciate your commitment to lay your cards on the table. Meaning to say, you are honest about what you want and how you want this collaboration to be. This will be addressed more directly when we look at the draft of the MOU later this morning. When we speak of collaboration between religious and clergy or bishops in the mission of the church, there are certain things that we can understand with greater clarity, like the theological grounding of this collaborative mission and its practical implications, like having procedures in place so that the mission continues without major conflicts. I would see these as structural elements of the intended collaboration. However, these structures get incarnated or they are made alive in everyday life through the intervention of human beings, you and me, we who are socially and culturally conditioned people. This is where the personal and social aspects of who we are as women and men today comes into play. This will be reflected in our everyday dealings and relationships within the congregations and in our engagements within the broader framework of the church. There are some aspects of the structure that we cannot change, such as only ordained men by virtue of their priestly ordination can exercise jurisdiction in the ecclesiastical system. We cannot also change the space that religious, particularly non-clerical brothers and women religious occupy in the hierarchical structuring of the church. But there is something that we can change. That is the way we function as women and men who occupy responsible positions as congregational leaders within the church setting. The type of women and men that we have become will determine how we understand the challenges in the church and how we respond to them. Correcting the gender imbalance will help to make the church become more inclusive, as Sister Maggie mentioned this morning in the welcome address. This is the reason why I have reworded the title of our session as The Gender Question in the Church. Addressing the gender question in relation to the church setting is rather a delicate issue. It is so because we ourselves are implied in it, because we are the church. I mean to say, we are part of the problem, but the good news is that we can also be part of the solution. We play different roles in the church as gendered beings, and we all take along our invisible gender backpacks. In order to figure out what we hold in our gender backpacks, we need to understand what is meant by gender. I will start with an anecdote that illustrates what gender is all about. The story amuses me so much that I have repeated it. Maybe some of you have heard me earlier. As part of my gender research, I was once interviewing a college professor who was also a member of the Diocesan Pastoral Council. He told me that he was all for women's empowerment and that it should start in the family. He likened the man and woman in a family to the wheels of a car, which, in his opinion, should run at the same pace and turn together for the car to move ahead smoothly. Listening to him, I was quite impressed by this allegory and wished there were more men in our society who would take women on an equal footing. However, as we progressed with the interview and my query focused on the economic question and decision-making patterns in the family, the same person who compared husband-wife relationship to the wheels of a car suddenly took a roundabout turn. He asserted that the car needs a driver and that God has entrusted to him that responsibility since he is the head of the family. Blissfully unaware of the irony, he shifted his position from the wheel of a car to its driver. And he affirmed his position by giving me almost a homily, quoting the scriptures to show how the man's role as head of the family is ordained by God and why we Christians should follow this plan of God for humans. I hope you understand how gender is at play in this anecdote. Even as equality is apparently affirmed, our friend, the college professor, feels he is born to be the head. And he thinks that God is also by his side in naming him the head. Here I would like to draw your attention to what I term as a gender blind spot in this case. I'm sure all of us are familiar with blind spots in our personality. So here I would like to call it a gendered blind spot. This professor, though scholarly in his professional life and engages actively in promoting women's empowerment, is apparently blind to the fact that women cannot be empowered in the family unless and until they discover their own powers. I think we need to pay attention to the word power because the very word power sometimes is very threatening, particularly in relation to the gender question. When we say power or empowerment, we are not thinking about power over relationships, domination. We all live from power. We need to live from our powers. Our intelligence is our power. Our capacity to know things, whatever we can name, we all need. Our spiritual strength is our power. Faith is power. Our capacity to relate is power. So I use the term power in relation to gender question in this context. This professor was blind to the contradictions of his own position and so his promotion of women could remain a mere rambling exercise since it lacks a critical analysis. Coming back to the church setting, if we are serious about a dynamic and liberative collaboration with the church leadership, I think we need to look squarely at how gender relations are defined and performed by women and men. See, many times when we say gender in relation to church or in society, there is always a fear that we are pointing a finger at men, or men are the personification of patriarchy and the like. From my years of engagement with this issue, I'm very convinced that it is neither the problem of men nor of women alone. It is a systemic problem. That is where I like to, draw your attention to what I term as gendered blind spots. If we are liberated from these, or if we can see these blind spots, and if we are freed from its shackles, we can function with greater energy, with greater freedom. And that's what I wish would happen in the church today. So first and foremost, I think we need to clarify the notion of gender, acknowledge our own gendered identities, and see how liberative it can be when we break through the gendered molds in which we have been cast as women and men. Many things about gender, most of us will be very familiar because this is nothing new. But just for a brief recap, so that we are more or less at the same wavelength, I just give a little bit of theoretical clarification on what we mean by gender. Gender, as you may know, refers to the manner in which manhood or womanhood is defined in any given society. The term gender is used to analyze the roles, responsibilities, constraints, opportunities, and needs of women and men in all areas and in any given social context. Gender roles are learned behaviors in a given society, community, or a social group. They condition our activities, tasks, responsibilities perceived as male or female. In the present times, particularly moving into the 21st century, the designs on the gender canvas of any given society has moved beyond questions relating to male-female gender binary to include concerns of gender non-conforming persons and sexual minorities coming under the broad umbrella of LGBTQI groups. But here within the church, particularly in the context of this meeting, we are addressing relationships or possible collaboration between women religious, men religious, and the leaders of the church, who are all women and men. So I will focus more on man relationship beneath the broader question of gender. Gender definitions, as we know, are very much colored by culture of a given historical period and geographical location. Certainly what it was meant to be a man or woman 50 years ago is very much drastically different from what it is to be today. In the Indian context, gender identity is very deeply marked by one's class, caste, and religion. How a woman is expected to behave in a caste framework would be very different from what the Indian society expects of a Dalit woman. Maybe some things are changing in the urban setting, but in rural India, the gendered restrictions on girls and women continue to be very rigid. Within a gendered framework, in general, Men are socialized to be strong, bold, and independent, whereas women are brought up in a gendered mold of dependency and receptivity. Why I want to bring all this, even though these are the basics of gender, is because you will see these reflected in our functioning, in our collaboration as women and men leaders in the church. While rationality becomes a defining feature of masculinity, women are expected to be emotional beings who are endowed with special capacity to be self-giving and self-sacrificing. Caring and nurturing then become defining features of femininity and, so to say, the prerogative of womanhood. Subsequently, gender roles follow these gender definitions, and men are groomed to leadership roles as though they are born leaders, and women are primarily caregivers as if these qualities are inborn or natural to them. Most of you who are provincials, regional superiors, or major superiors in your own congregation, most of your women are exercising leadership within your congregation. So I'm sure you would like to contest what I said just now. But what I like to refer to is within the broader framework of the church, how do we relate? By leadership, we do not mean who is the boss.
I went and out and came.
Okay. By leadership, we also mean our capacity to engage in dialogue, our capacity to think, to articulate what we are convinced of. Family, education, language, media, religion, and all other vehicles of culture become active agents in the gendered socialization of women and men right from childhood days. As per the gendered notions of being human, the so-called masculinity and femininity are meant to complement each other. So men would occupy the positions of the head, be it in the family or any social organization. Subsequently, since women are expected to be doers, service providers, caregivers, their role would be romanticized as the heart. I suppose you have heard women being called the heart of the family, the light of the family, etc. All these proceed from the gendered complementarity of roles. Some of you may ask, what is the problem with complementarity? Complementarity is all right, I would think, when our roles can interchange. And when the roles that we play have an equal value, then complementarity is okay. Because one day I can be strong and you with whom I may relate may be weak. And the next day maybe I am the weak one. So it is not that one category of people, of humans, are stuck to one identity. Most of us as leaders, as educated people, definitely we have moved beyond. But still, I would think we need to introspect and see, particularly in the light of our relationships and our collaboration within the church, what are the traces of these gendered conditioning that we still uphold, that comes to the surface now and then? The sad consequence of gendering or gender socialization is that neither women nor men develop qualities that will make them fully human. When I look back at my own life, I think the best thing that has happened to me, particularly when I moved from my 30s or late 20s, 30s to 40s, is this freedom to break free of the gendered mold. That is the time, particularly in my late 20s, when I was a student of theology in Goregaon Seminary in Bombay that I discovered I have capacity to think. I too am intelligent. Not that I was, kind of dumb earlier, but I never thought that was very important. So the whole thing of I discovered I can be independent. I don't have to be dependent all the time. That I can care, but I can also think and act. For me, the important question is how can we become fully human without integrating the qualities of the head, the heart, and the spirit as embodied beings? How we evolve in our personal lives does have a say in our institutional life and certainly on church life. In fact, all of us carry layers of gender conditioning depending on how we are positioned at the intersection of our class and caste identity with gender. Since we have moved from our family identity molds of caste and class, and we belong now to an ecclesiastical or ecclesial setting, perhaps this is not very evident. But our conditioning becomes more acute where religion intersects with gender. And this takes our discussion again to gender relations in the church. I think it will be good to take stock of how you see yourself as religious, particularly as women religious in the Western region, with regard to the gender question. This is important because you are at the verge of signing an MOU with the bishops of this region who are all men. While the MOU can be very clearly worded, its effectiveness and applicability to real concerns affecting your life and mission as religious will depend on how you have evolved to think and act out of the gender box. In the light of my experience of working with women's concerns for nearly 30 years, I see that while it is easier to crack the gender mold in the secular sphere, it's a lot more difficult within the framework of religion. This is because religions have played an important role in creating and perpetuating the patriarchal ideology, and Christianity is no exception to that. Religions in general have cast women, as they call, in a gendered mold, taking docility, obedience, capacity to suffer in silence, and similar qualities as essential features of femininity, and these serve to keep women subjugated. When these socio-cultural elements get mediated through religious doctrines and practices, they get legitimized and acquire a hegemonic grip, particularly over women. This gendering process is done in a very subtle manner by presenting role models of ideal womanhood and inviting women to emulate them. Religious power exercised as hegemony works through women's consent, and women become active collaborators in sustaining a system that subordinates them. The more patriarchal or male-dominated a society, man-woman relationships get more clearly marked by dominance and subordination, with elements of cooperation, force, and at times even violence sustaining them. Regrettably, we tend to see a lot of this happening also in the church on issues related to mission, the use or appropriation of property and other resources, etc. The silence and fear expressed by women religious on encountering these and other forms of gender violence, particularly sexual violence, betray this experience. If you are serious about setting right man-woman relationships in the church, or engaging in healthy collaboration between religious and the church leadership, I think there is no shortcut other than to engage in critical thinking. Once a sister told me that in her provincial's opinion, critical thinking is a sin. Critical thinking is not about engaging in destructive criticism, but it is about asking critical questions regarding any situation. Questions like, what is happening here? Why is it happening? How do we address this? To me, these are very important critical questions that we need to ask, whether it is in the community, family, or in any area of mission. Romila Thapar, many of you must have read her, the acclaimed Indian historian, has a much quoted essay titled, "To question or not to question? This is the question." In this essay, she says, it is not that we lack people who can ask relevant questions, but frequently where there should be voices, there is silence. Are we all being co-opted too easily by the comforts of conforming? Are we fearful of the retribution that questioning may and often does bring? The comforts of conforming, as noted by Thapar, can be applied also to gender conformity. Many people tend to remain stuck in their gendered comfort zones. Usually we associate this terminology comfort zones with our economic privileges or our all lot of other privileges, comforts that we have, or that which distances us from the plight of the ordinary people. But here I refer to gendered comfort zones. This also refers to privileges, particularly the privileges that men enjoy and the dependencies that women enjoy. In these quote unquote comfortable spaces, there is no scope for taking risks or taking a stand for truth and justice. We see this happening in the secular society and also in the church. Breaking free of the comforts of conforming is indeed a challenge posed before religious life in India today. When religious leaders are afraid to ask critical questions as to why things are going on the way they are, I think we are into serious trouble because repressive situations continue unchallenged. This is happening within the church as well as in our secular society. The MOU that is drafted, if put to effect, is surely a sign of hope, as it could become an effective tool for facilitating a critical dialogue between religious and bishops for enhancing healthy collaboration in the mission of the church. And for this, to put this MOU into effect, certainly we will need to move beyond the comforts of conforming. When the topic was initially suggested to me by Sister Maggie as the challenges faced by religious, especially women religious, and the response of the church leadership, I remembered LCWR, the Leadership Conference of Women Religious in the United States. And I felt they have a message today to the leaders of Western religion CRI. You may remember that in 2009, LCWR gained global attention for one of the major challenges they faced in their life story as an organization, when the Vatican announced 2 investigations of the US Catholic sisters. First, an apostolic visitation through which the Vatican sought information about the quote-unquote quality of life within all apostolic orders of the US sisters. And second, a doctrinal assessment of LCWR. And as you may know, LCWR is an organization of more than 1,400 sisters who were leaders of more than 300 congregations of women religious in the United States. Even though there was a lot of initial turmoil over these investigations, the leadership team of LCWR initiated a series of meetings with Vatican delegates and engaged in critical and constructive conversations, dialogues for clarifying the issues. From Indian Women Theologians Forum, we've been in touch with the LCWR because some of them have been leading feminist theologians of the United States. And we've been informed a lot of developments at this phase. To my reading, LCWR could do this because since the 80s, women religious in the United States had broken free of their gendered molds. And I can say they had become adult women in the church, women who could think and ask critical questions on issues affecting their lives. On 16 April 2015, after completing the LCWR assessment, a concluding report was jointly prepared by the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith, since the CDF had initiated the investigation, and LCWR. This report was released in 2015, and I would like to quote from this report. Quote, "From the beginning of our extensive conversations, were marked by a spirit of prayer, love for the church, mutual respect, and cooperation. We found our conversations to be mutually beneficial." Such a positive conclusion to what was a very serious challenge for them is testified as transformational leadership. I think in the Indian ecclesiastical setting, the implications of engaging in transformational leadership has a lot of significance. And as Father Joe Manath rightly pointed out, the leaders, women and men of Western Region CRI, can give a lead in this to the rest of India. And perhaps your MOU can be a pointer in this direction. To conclude, I want to share a narration by Bernadette Mubé, who is a womanist theologian from Africa. She says, "When I was a little girl, I studied in a boarding school where they taught me to walk on my toes without making any noise, as though I should move around totally unperceived. When I came home, I entered as they had taught me in the school, in such a way that my mother did not know of my arrival until I surprised her in the kitchen. But she turned to me in reproach as she said, 'You are not a slave to walk so quietly and with shame. This is your home. Here you must walk with pride and with the confidence of a daughter. I want to hear you taking each step with security.' So let us take each step with freedom and security in the church, as this is our home. Thank you."
Thank you, Dr. Kochurani. We will have the vote of thanks at the end, but right now, we would like to ask any of you who would like to ask Dr. Kochurani to clarify any of the things that she has said, or any other questions, any queries that you might have. You could either unmute yourself and speak directly on this forum, or for those of you who are watching us on YouTube, you could write your question in the chat section.
Yes, Maggie. Yeah, it's not a question, but I just want to thank Dr. Kuchrani, because always when we talk about gender issues, we say, men are responsible for all our problems. Like the clarity that you brought in, and then it's not women, men alone or women alone are responsible for all the problems that women especially face. It's kind of the structure and the system, and how we especially today as women religious, or men and women together, we need to tackle this issue. And I would also like to know from your own experience, Dr. Kuchrani, when you have been handling quite a number of issues that we all know in different parts of country, especially in Kerala. Uh, can you share one of your experiences where you have come across, the struggles or the challenges when you had to be very strong on getting justice for women, especially in the church?
One issue where I was directly engaged since some years is the issue of Nyarakal case. Some of you must be familiar with that. This is an issue of property settlements between the church leadership and the community of the sisters. I've been following it up initially when they were in a lot of strife, accompanying the sisters, and even the Forum of Religious for Justice and Peace had engaged with the issue, kind of initiating dialogue with the church leaders and the sisters. But unfortunately, at that stage, it was very difficult to make a breakthrough. That is where I feel it is because we just feel we cannot, they are the church leaders and we should be where we are, and, we cannot speak openly as adults, as adult women and men committed to a mission of the church. So when the whole thing went into the secular space of court cases and all that, we didn't need to get into all that if such dialogues were possible within the church circles. And here again, as Sister Maggie said, it is not just the problem of men, it is the problem of women themselves, because women just felt very dumb, except for few sisters who felt they were asked to explore the whole issue of property, concerns. And even their own leadership didn't stand with them, unfortunately. So that is why it went out of hand. And this can, as I mentioned earlier, this can apply even to other issues of violence, gender violence, sexual violence. Some years ago, when there was this case of voyeurism, I myself was, when this sister approached the forum and they contacted me also to be part of drafting responses, we were very keen that this should not go out into the civil society circles. We wanted to defend the church, but it was so difficult to engage in conversations. That is why I'm really happy that the MOU that you have planned, you want to constitute this forum or council where you can address issues, not just about violence, but about collaboration. We need to create platforms. We need to engage in these conversations. Without that, We can't. Issues won't solve by putting them under the carpet. We have to bring it to the surface and address them as adults, women and men. And so maybe you all know more cases than me. And that's where I want to say, let us become free. Let us not be threatened, as women and as men. Become brothers and sisters, not fathers and daughters. my reading, women religious, particularly women religious leaders are very smart women, bold women. But sometimes this is so contained within the congregational circles. When we cross that to the ecclesiastical circle, women tend to become young daughters, little girls, and men adults. No? That is why we cannot engage in adult to adult conversations. We need to grow up, both of us. And it is so freeing. That is why I've always been impressed by the LCWR and their contribution. We can say India is not America, but we have many things to learn from them. We don't have to take everything from them because culturally they're very different. But, recently a book has come out on conversations with the leaders of LCWR, and it is titled Transformational Leadership. And I think all of us have lots to learn from that. How can leadership become transformational? Whatever be the aspect that we are addressing. Not just gender questions, psychological problems. How can our leadership be transformative? I hope I have answered you, Maggie.
Yes, very much, very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes, Nancy, go ahead.
Coach Rani, the point you brought out about, I like this point very much, this gendered comfort zones. We need to move beyond the comforts, you said, of conforming. Now, when I look at the structures and systems prevalent in our in the religious life of, women's religious context, most of these are situated in a way that it makes us it's comforting to conform. And listening to you, I realize, and as been said, we are not just facing an era of change, but a change of era. And I think this change of, we are not just facing an era of change, but a change of era. I think this needs to come into the way this change of era has to simmer down to our religious context, to the way we understand and express religious life, the way we understand vows, particularly the vow of obedience. It's very comforting for many of us to say, I have been told to do this and I conform. But to engage in dialogue that helps us discern God's will, if we may call it that, I think is a process that is important. And I realize also that the formation patterns that we were inducted into religious life do not help us at this time. And I think we need some real thinking, critical thinking at a very deep level. And we need to get together, because very often when I myself was the Western Region President, whenever issues came up, one of the things that saddened me was hearing many provincials and majors saying, no, this is not happening in our congregation. Thank God it's not happening in my congregation. Perhaps it's not. But I think we need to pull our forces together and get together it's not within the congregation, but we need working together to face this era of change, or change of era, whatever we may call it. So it was nice listening to you, Coach Rani, and I hope you can say something about this, about where we internally need to rethink our systems, our structures, and our way of understanding consecration and vows. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I think you have explained it all. For me, what is important is the change has to start within oneself, because this is what I am, and what I become, or what I am becoming, has a definite impact on wherever I am based, the group with whom I relate, the type of mission I engage in, and the communities that I belong to, or the associations that I'm part of. So I would say, we have to work at the personal level, and we also have to work at the structural level. So these have to go simultaneously. And this has to address or inform every aspect of our lives. Say, for example, spirituality. Now there are few sisters maybe trained to be spiritual directors. Okay, I remember, when I studied in Goregaon Seminary, when sisters, that was many years ago, maybe about 30 years ago, maybe 40 years, my God. Maybe things have changed now, okay? It was in the late 80s. And all the sisters' convents have once a month recollection. And usually they go after the most popular spiritual directors to give the recollection. If they could not get them, then they will go after the brothers, okay? And some of these brothers used to say, you nuns spend hours praying, okay? But when if we are invited for a recollection, we will refer 3 books and prepare a good talk about prayer. And you will all be with open mouths listening to us. For me, how do we awaken our spiritual agency? This agency is a word which I learned from social theorists, particularly during my research, my doctoral research. Earlier we were familiar with the term agency, agency as some shops or gas agency and all that. In social theorizing, agency is a very important word. Agency means your capacity to make a difference. Okay? So for me, the important question is, what is my spiritual agency? What is my intellectual agency? What is my ecclesiastical agency? Is it awakened? Are we awakened to that? Okay. That is where I would really invite all of us to break free of the layers of gender conditioning. Okay? Because if this agency is awakened in us, the US sisters who are leaders of LCWR, they are speaking a lot about their spiritual agency, the powers of contemplation. Okay? Because they have reached there. They know they can bank on that. Okay? So how do we, within ourselves or in our communities, how do we awaken that? How do we enable that? Okay? That's where I really feel in the Indian church, women, and all the more women religious, have to become adults. Okay? What is our intellectual agency? Is it only connected to the degrees that we have, or Can we engage in conversations, okay, serious conversations of issues affecting the church, of what is happening in our society today, of the new initiatives that need to emerge from women religious in order to address concerns happening in society. Somebody from CRI Pune has put a question here. When a religious wants to launch out to start a ministry in the diocese, they have to get permission from the bishop. The bishops may or may not grant the permission, especially when he has some bias on that particular congregation or other selfish motives. Do you think the canon law should be changed, or how to handle this issue? This is male domination, I feel. I'm sorry, I cannot answer this fully because I'm not a canon lawyer. Okay. I think, but you know what is important is, I think we can engage in conversations where canon law can be addressed. Maybe we cannot change canon law overnight. And we need to respect the leadership of the bishop, but can we engage in conversations instead of fear paralyzing women religious? Unfortunately, maybe that is where, you know, the gendering part comes very strongly. If the same thing happens to a men's religious congregation or a brother's congregation, their approach would be very different. Their standing would be different. Why do women religious become paralyzed by fear? And unfortunately, there is a hierarchy of fears. We may think fear is only for the young religious who are not made final vows. There is a strong fear at that level. But even as you go up the hierarchical ladder, even within religious congregations of women, those who are leaders have another set of fears. What would the bishop say? So how do we overcome our fears, or how do we face our fears without fear? That is the question. Can we face our fears without fear? Many of you are psychologists, and you know the best way to overcome fear is to face what we are afraid of. Can we do that? I really believe there is a breakthrough, provided we are ready to tap our own resources, God-given resources, to address situations.
Sister Bridget would like to ask a question. Please go ahead, Sister Bridget. Unmute yourself. In the meantime, while Sister Bridget is getting ready.
Hello, am I heard?
Yes. Now we can hear
Okay, I don't want to ask a question, but I wanted to make a reaffirming comment about what Kuchrani has spoken. It's when we speak about Kuchrani spoke about that the personal transformation where the change need to start with our own selves. I completely agree with that. But I also would like to add one thing is, I think it is a high time where we reform our own formative programs, both for men and women religious, where we are able to, or where we are retaught to think in such a term as a potential individuals who can generate one's own reflections without fear. And as Kuchrani said, not as a copy-paste culture. Okay, and a culture of mutual respect, which begins from the beginning stage. Because if we look at the young priest and also many young religious, women religious are much more forward thinking, I feel. But I have come across with many young men religious and the diocesan priest who become even more traditional than the current people, no? So it somewhere the formative programs are to be rethought, where this mutual respect and a liberative thinking has to begin at that formative programs. how we interpret our canon laws or whatever in the interpretation of our theological reflections and theological contents. I think somewhere there we have to also focus. Okay, because it's not just as someone said here, it's not just a congregational matter, but it is like, see, even we have rewritten the missals, renewed the missals, but what are the languages that comes over there? Okay, even that is gender biased, which is rewritten now. So where are we? So that's what I feel. The reformation has to happen from the roots and in every aspect. Thank you.
Can I say something, Cleo?
Yes, Noella, go ahead.
Kochu, thank you. It was very simple and very profound, as always.
Thank you.
I just
Can't
want
hear.
to make
Noella, we can't hear. Can you? It's very feeble. We can't
Is
hear.
this better?
Yes,
Is this
yes,
better?
much better. Much better.
Okay, thank you. I affirm what Kochu has said with a lot of simplicity and also very profound, as always. I just want to make a couple of comments, and I would like you to respond to them. You know, this whole unmolding, if I may use that word, getting out of this gender mold depends on the kind of exposure you have. Now, when I see the type of recruits that are coming, young women joining congregations today, it's my perception only, they are coming for position, for status quo, for security. And this has to change on a structural level. Very few of us really are concerned with the gender mold and are broken free. And now with the problems. I don't consider myself a problem, but yes, we are a problem, especially when we go out of congregations, and Maggie has said is more difficult. So how do you see this? Somehow, how do we awaken ourselves, the leadership? How do we awaken ourselves to this? Somehow, at least my experience and my current experience at the moment working within congregations is that our religious leaders are so scared of going against bishops. And I'm talking about current leadership. So, I mean, say 2% are okay with this who go ahead, but very, very tough. I don't know how many generations it's going to take. And we have to sit down waiting for women who are against women to make up their minds. Maybe you have the same experience also.
Noella,
I say this because, you know, working with CRI, you cannot go against certain norms also. CRI is mostly women, you know, and that's where I have this experience. Yeah, Kochu.
I agree with certain aspects that you said, Noella, that our processes of freeing ourselves from gendered molds would depend a lot on our exposure. But I don't agree with the second part of it, that all the young people who may be joining could be looking for positions or status. Some could be. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. But even if they are coming with different motives, I would still think that if the congregational space or the congregational culture facilitates critical conversations, okay, dialogues, challenges that really challenge them as to what they are about, you can bring about a difference. You know, last year I was invited to a congregation to accompany them through a process, and also to be a reflector at their province assembly. And this has been a very progressive congregation, okay, in India. But to my big surprise, I found, and they had a big group of young people. And when I say young people, they were not novices who were there at the assembly. It was mainly, the young professed. And to my surprise, people who were engaging with questions and issues were the 60, 70 plus in that assembly. And I was really, as a reflector, observer, I brought it to their notice. Why are the young people who are the future of tomorrow quiet? Are they afraid to say something different? Are they afraid of their own leaders or the senior sisters? Or is it because they have nothing more besides the comforts of their congregational setting? For me, that poses most serious challenge to the formation system. Okay, even if we have one person, and for that, for that, I agree with Bridget who made the intervention. How does our formation challenge us to go beyond whatever we have brought, or to undo the backpacks that we have carried along? Sometimes I feel the formation patterns, or our rigidity with certain practices in the formation, make even bold young women, infantilizes them. You put them as a, like you are a pre-novice, you have to be in a cradle and be fed. It's ridiculous sometimes. Do we challenge them? And sometimes these young people, even though they're coming from very poor backgrounds, they have faced a lot more challenges in life and they can really take the torch ahead. But does our formation deform them? For me, that is the thing. What is the congregational culture? Okay, a lot of our formation would depend on the congregational culture. If the congregational culture is not freed, liberated in the gospel sense of liberation, what do we offer the young people? Okay, that's all.
I just because we women religious, all of us are talking, and there are quite a good number of priests present for this meeting. It would be good to hear from one man
Yeah, I would like
priest
to.
perspective. Thank you.
Yes.
Tenny, go ahead.
Yeah. See, Sister Kochirani, I appreciate your thoughts and your ideas. The second time listening to you, very nice to hear you. The thoughts which you have shared today, it's a call for awakening. We do appreciate. But the thing that which you are talking about, okay, to change the adult, those who are in power or those who are religious, okay, well and good. You know that change is very difficult because we are all part of the system. That systemic change what you are proposed, I think we should think about that too, because these children, they are coming from family, and these children are becoming adults and they are joining the religious life. They are becoming the priests, they are becoming the bishops. So I think that thought pattern should change from family itself. So I think we are involved as social agents, as a catalyst. We can do certain kind of formation from family itself. So I think we should work on that too. Not only changing the MOU, or we are working on MOU, that are well and good. We need it. But at the same time, our ministry, where we are engaged in family mission, wherever. Thank you.
Thanks, Father Tenny, and thanks to
Sure, Father
Sister
Tenny.
Kochu.
I think the supply, sorry.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, it's not just for family apostolates to do it. See, most of our religious congregations are running schools. Okay, what is the transformative education that we bring through the schools? Do we initiate critical gender reflections in our schools? It can start everywhere. I agree with you totally. But what I am convinced is that unless we are convinced of that, we won't transmit that. What we are convinced of, we always give what we have, right? And we cannot give something else. So it should go in through all the apostolates, inside, outside. Thank you.
Thanks once again, Dr. Kochurani. I'd like to now ask Father Joby Matthew to express our gratitude to you on behalf of all the participants here.
Thank you, Father Cleo. Thank you, Dr. Kochurani, for the thought-provoking and thought-provoking discussion on the theme for our annual meeting. I think you have given us a very good start, not only in terms of provoking our thoughts, but also giving us a little bit of guilt feeling, in the sense when I say it's not men's problem or women's problem, it's our problem. So we are part of the problem, and that itself gives us the inspiration that if you have to change, first we have to change from within. I just want to emphasize, as I thank you, one problem or one point that you articulated, that we ourselves are perpetuating the growth of a system we are trying to fight to break away. In the sense, I think that's what you said, that yes, we want gender parity, we want freedom, but at the same time, we are happy to be subservient, we are happy to remain where we are because of the gender comfort zones. So you have really told us to break away from the gender comfort zones, and you also, your final words were really powerful, saying that think and ask critical questions on issues that affect our life. I think that is what will empower all of us, both men and women, religious, to break away from the gender comfort zones and come out powerfully to lead the church forward and be agents of change in the society and the church. Thank you so much on behalf of all the members of Western region. Thank you. Thank you for giving us a good start to our meeting, and thank you for sparing your time and energy and resources on for us. Thank you so much, Dr. Kuchrani.
Thank you very much.
For all of us to know, Dr. Kochrani still stays with us. She'll be animating the discussion at the end on the MOU. So we will await that part of your intervention too. We'll now have a small